Is the camera positioning better now?
Yeah, you're great, man. You're great. We're
Awesome.
we're live. Welcome, truth seekers. We've got Kasim back, and I'm super excited to have Kasim back here. You were just saying your office just randomly moved directions while you
Yeah,
were
I just woke up one day and it was 180 degrees.
while you were sitting there. It just
Yeah,
twisted. Yeah,
I just rolled with it because why not?
I hear you.
Yeah.
That's what you should do.
Sign from the gods.
Yeah, I shaved. Yeah, I figure it's been a year. I never intended to have a beard, but I'm mentioning that because you brought it up a minute ago. Seems weird. It's like a weird.
Randomly, I shaved.
I know.
Topic number one for the morning.
I know. I know. So before I cut it all off, I did this thing, like
Yeah,
that.
I saw you posted on Facebook. I liked it.
Yeah, yeah. I actually thought that was fun. Maybe I might bring that back.
But see, now you don't fit in New York, right? Because nobody doesn't have a beard.
I know. Well, in Williamsburg, yeah. I don't.
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna get kicked out of my building now. I'd expect that to happen.
Either that or they're gonna like try to give you directions to places because they think you're a tourist.
Totally. Oh God. Oh yes. How have you been?
Man, I'm living the dream.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you been reading up on stuff?
Yeah, I'm on Dostoevsky right now. Did I say that right?
I'm pretty sure you did not, but hey.
Yeah, it's so many syllables. Those Russians. Um, yeah, I'm reading the Brothers Karamazov, which I'm sure I didn't say right either, and it's amazing. He reminds me a lot of Dickens, but if Dickens had way more time on his hands to just go off on tangents. So I like it. I was turned on to it by Jordan Peterson, who we talked about last time. And Peterson quotes Dostoevsky more than any other fictional writer, so I thought it just makes sense to do that.
Interesting. All
Yeah,
right.
and then my brother told me that it's his favorite book, so the stars aligned and I read it, or I'm reading it.
And I think we talked about that a little bit on Thursday when we met. My uncle, who's 91, has started reading it as well. So
Yeah, you told me that. That is
yeah,
random.
yeah.
Yeah, it's weird how when something enters like the stratosphere of your consciousness, like all of a sudden it starts popping up everywhere. Like when I bought a Prius, then the road just seems to be flooded with Priuses
Oh yeah, for
or
sure.
Prii or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Do you
Yeah,
drive a Prius?
my wife drives a Prius.
Do you
Yeah,
like it? Because I hate it.
I hate to love it, to be honest with you, because I was opposed to the idea,
I'm
because they're
fine
not.
with the idea, except for the holier than thou kind of aspect that some Prius owners
Oh God,
do.
yeah, yeah. They just if you haven't immediately saved a dolphin like 10 minutes ago, they hate you. No, so here's why I'm opposed to the idea. I love green technology. The thing about the Prius, though, is it's not any more environmentally friendly than other cars when you think about the battery.
Hmm.
Because the damage those batteries can do can
Oh,
exceed the carbon emissions, and they don't know what to do with them. So they're just stockpiling these batteries. But my wife made a really compelling point. She goes, "Look, even if it's not greener, it's your dollar is your vote,
hmm.
and we're letting companies know we're willing to pay for green technology." So then we bought it, and
That's an interesting point. Hmm.
yeah,
Okay.
she's sharp, man. She's so much smarter than me. You should have her on Coffee with Calvin. She
All
should
right.
blow
Sure.
her mind. I like it. I like the car. It's a smooth ride.
I hate driving it. That's my point. Like I don't
Yeah,
mind
why? What's wrong with it?
I don't know the suspension or the acceleration or like whatever. I
Oh,
like little roadsters and shit.
see, I drive like an 80-year-old AARP representative. Like I go the exact speed limit. I stay in one lane the whole time. I'm just like the most boring driver in the world. So if you want some get up and go, then yeah, the Prius is not your thing.
No, no. I had a Z3. Oh, Z4. That was my thing.
Yeah, the ones that look like a shark.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That one. Yeah,
yeah, I
I
know
like
those.
that.
Yeah,
I like that one better.
yeah, I
It's kind
can't.
of my
I
jam.
don't know.
I wouldn't mind. I'd love the Tesla Roadster. I don't think they make it anymore, right?
Do they not? Why would they stop? Because that
I
that
think
was
they
the.
stopped when they made the S.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
You
I
can
know
only
when
get
you
in
go to
those
test
ones.
drive a Tesla, they make you do a launch, and the salesman sits in the car with you, and he forces you to slam the pedal to the metal. And if you don't do it right, they'll make you do it again. And it's a brilliant piece of marketing because Tesla's kind of acclimating you to what the car can do, and they're doing it in a way that every other car. Anytime you go test drive a car, it's always like, okay, please be careful. And Tesla's like, let us show you some stuff.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Did you see the thing they did with the that was the X model versus an Alfa Romeo? Did you see that one?
No.
There's a video where they because the X is a pretty big car, And then they
That's the
did
one with the wings.
the wings
Yeah.
exactly. So they did that with like a speed test head to head with an Alfa Romeo. I don't know if it was actually Tesla who made the video, or if it was this British Top Gear show or something like that. But the video is out there; you can find it. And the Tesla just like pulled ahead. It would just like hands down beat the Alpha on acceleration and it was a like acceleration test, short lane, how to get that fast. And then they had this trick up their sleeve, which was the Tesla is beating the Alpha just hands down and by a wide margin. And then they pan out and they show you that the Tesla is actually pulling a trailer with another Alpha on top of it. Behind.
That's awesome. That's a good one.
That was such a. I mean, Elon is pretty good at these like little things. I'm not sure he made that, but that kind of like just making sure that you build an electric SUV type car and it just like beats out this Italian sports car.
He's an artist. Yeah, that
and
guy.
also what was it, the biohazard, like ludicrous. He has these like the air filter system that is so good that like if there's a chemical attack, you want to get inside your car and turn on the.
That's one of the few six-figure cars, the X. I think it's $100,000 or close to it, and it's one of the few $100,000 cars where I'm like, I think that might be worth $100,000. Because usually when I see a car that's $100,000 in my mind, there's there's just that thing that rings, and I'm like, that's stupid. But yeah, that's one of those ones where I was like, I might do that. That if I had.
I've never actually driven one. I don't know, but they're very popular in Denmark, and especially in the neighborhood that my dad lives in, because there's this tax exemption for electric vehicles in Denmark, and since taxes on new cars is about 200%.
Yeah, I heard that.
That makes a difference. So everybody got a Tesla, and then they repeal that tax break for electric cars, and because it was never really, I guess, about electricity, but like if rich people get electric cars, then they don't. I don't know why they would repeal it, but they did.
But they're losing money. Municipalities losing money, and they need to rein that in.
And they're not really about the environment, right? They're about being jealous of people who can afford nice cars or something. I don't. Yeah. So anyway, so they repealed that. So of course, like right up until that repeal went into effect, everybody who could afford it bought a Tesla.
That's funny. So if
it's a good investment too, right? Because now the used car price is going to go up.
But I was just about to ask that. If you for private party purchases, do you have no sales tax?
No, you pay it on the new purchase of the new car, which also makes it tricky to change. It's like if you wanted to actually lower that rate, which I mean, no politician ever wants to lower taxes.
Any rate, yeah.
If they can avoid it, but if they wanted to, right, that would immediately do significant harm to the private used car market.
Not that I'm in favor of it, but it's interesting to me because from a sustainability standpoint, if you heavily tax new things, it means that people reuse old things.
That's exactly what happens. Exactly what happens. We have one of the oldest car fleets in the world, or like in the Western world, as far as I know. I haven't followed up on this, but it's definitely a concern.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so I mean that actually brings me to so I spent my Sunday pretty much in bed watching Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman.
Oh, yeah.
Have you read any or seen any Thomas Sowell?
Not Thomas Sowell at all, but I know Milton Friedman really well.
Do you know? Okay, that's cool. Because I don't like. I've started with Thomas Sowell a while, but do you know who he is?
His name comes up in these conversations.
I'll tell you.
Yeah, I'm ashamed to say no.
He's an old black guy. He's a professor at the Hoover Institute, which I think is at Harvard or something.
Okay.
He's 87 now or something like that. He's pretty old.
Yeah.
Very smart, and he's basically like he says a lot of things, but basically any talk of systemic racism in this country at this point is nonsense. All these things that we attribute to racism are and the whole idea that there should be an equal amount of men or women or different ethnic groups in any random population is nonsense. It's never been that way. It's like. And when it's not, there's no indication that there's any racism or discrimination or anything like that going on. There might be, But the fact that things are not equally distributed is not evidence of that in any way. And there isn't much evidence to come by in practice. So, but he also wrote a book about, he wrote a book called Basic Economics that I just started reading, which is, he's written like 15 books or something like that.
Yeah, I just noticed he wrote Black Rednecks and White Liberals. That's how I know him, because that book gets quoted all the time.
It's great. I read, that was my first Thomas Sowell book.
Is it worth reading? Should I add it to the list?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, for sure. Like, it's just talking about these, like, minority groups, and like in some countries minority groups do way better than the majority group overall, or in certain areas, and it's there's no, like, this morning I just got an email from, I don't know, this called The Information, which is about, it's a online magazine that you pay for, about like the tech industry and what's going on and mergers and stuff. And there was an article, it's about diversity in venture capital, and it goes like this. I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs. The proportion of women in decision-making positions at the most prominent venture capital firms inched up to just over 14% last year from roughly 11% in 2016. Black representation, on the other hand, dropped marginally. That's according to a survey, blah, blah, blah. And it's all this like, well, if there's more women, that must be a good thing necessarily, or more blacks, that must be a good thing. I don't see that it is or is not.
Well, I think if we look at everybody as being equal, then it's contrary to that paradigm to say we need more women, right? Well, it's just we need more good people. Like, if we're going to make it meritocratic, then it no longer needs to be men or women, black or white or whatever. It just needs to be we need more people that can do this job really well.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's
saying that you need more black people is by definition racist.
Yeah, so that's what's funny too, is you can say like positive racism exists everywhere. Like, people are really comfortable saying like, oh gosh, black people are such phenomenal athletes, and what they don't realize is that's a racist statement. You know what I mean? Because if you follow that line of thinking, you have to start following down other common denominator trails that will make you, negative racist instead of positive racist.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, affirmative action is something that he talks about. I found this interview from 1981 with William F. Buckley, who's another person that apparently seems to be. I didn't know this person, but and it's the exact same issues that we're talking about today, like affirmative action, gender pay gap, all these things, and it's just like there is no evidence. So he specifically, in another video I saw, talks about affirmative action at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley, and he says what that means is that 70% of these black people who get admitted into Berkeley are going to fail because they're just not a good match for Berkeley and the education there and the teaching style and the expectations. And so the only ones who benefit from this affirmative action policy is UC Berkeley, that gets to use these black kids as window dressing for a couple of years before they're tossed out. That's the only benefit we get.
Because they're, touted, and anytime there's the photo op, they drag certain kids out, and
and they're going to fail, most of them, because they're just not qualified. They're not a match for the institution. Whereas if they had gone to, so now they've wasted a couple of years on this, and if they'd gone to a college that was a match for them, their teaching style, their learning style, their education level, they would have gone ahead. They could have gotten a good degree. Or now they get a degree in one of the easier studies like literature or something like that, where the demands are not as rigorous, and they could have been great chemists at some other university.
Well, and you're reinforcing stereotypes too, because what ends up happening is if you lower the bar for any group of people, and the contrarian belief is that those group of people don't belong here. Mm-hmm. Well, when they don't perform as well as their peers, you're actually you're giving credence to that viewpoint.
Right. Well, yes, exactly. And these people are, and at the same time, they're being told, well, the reason that you're failing is because the professor's out to get you, which is not the case, right? And so that brings resentment. And these people are taking positions that would have gone to Asians or white people or whatever who were better qualified. And obviously, these people are going to be like resentful towards the people who took their place.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. I don't challenge the idea that it's harder being black in America than it is being white or Asian or whatever. What I challenge, though, is I don't think there's a way to fix it with policy. because and I'm stealing this from somebody else. I was in a conversation with somebody at MDMC, and he made a funny point. He goes, he's like, I'm tall too. I'm 6'4", and I can tell you, being tall makes life so much easier. You know, I mean, it's easier in job interviews, negotiations, easier with women. Everything about life is easier. So, but nobody's ever challenged me about tall privilege, and I think that's funny. And if you think about like height, symmetry in the way you look, you know, the way you articulate yourself, which really has way more to do with your geographic positioning when you're born than anything else. All those things add a certain level or degree or percentage of privilege. So if we're going to start keeping a report card, and now when you and I both apply for a job, it's like, well, Calvin has 15.7 privilege points and Kasim has 36. You know what I mean? Like, it's a layer of absurdity that we just can't follow through on. Like, we need to just cut that shit out. And I hate to say it, but kind of let the chips fall where they may. As long as people aren't being overtly subjugated, you know,
well,
like.
And even, what does that mean? Overtly subjugated?
Well, I just mean, like, you know, lynching in the street, very clearly the worst, you know, something that we should fight against. But
yeah, but not because people are black or women.
Yeah.
Like, we should not have lynching in the street of anybody.
Right. Yeah. So it's, you know, it's interesting because, you know, these conversations are sensitive because you don't want to support any layer or degree of racism. So you have to like say the platitude bullshit like, well, obviously I don't agree with X, Y, and Z. But now this is going to get really weird, Calvin. So forgive me because I'm probably going to say something kind of incendiary. I read in an article that if you have a foreign name, you have to go on 1.5 interviews for every one interview somebody with a normal name goes on. So if your name's John, then you go on one interview for every, you know, 1.5 interviews that Kasim has to go on. And they were using that as an example of racism. I don't think that's racism. I just think that people tend to veer towards familiarity. And then B, who gives a shit? Like, if that's true, if I have to go on a half more interview before I get the job, it just means I have to work a little bit harder. But then, you know, in 10, 20 years, whatever, as generations intermingle and people get more comfortable with things, that starts to go away. But the instant I try to make it like a federal case, all I'm doing is I'm hurting myself. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I think it's a flawed model, and it actually hurts the people that we're trying to help.
I think it does very much so. But like, you could also change your name, right? That's legal. You can just go change your name.
Right.
Hey, but so I think the interesting thing is like, why might an employer be more reluctant to hire someone or see someone for? I guess in this case, you're saying they do go to the interview. But because they have a funny name, they don't get the job, right? That's what you're saying. They have to do 1.5 more, or maybe they have to, you know, apply to more jobs, rather, you know, in order to get to an interview as well. So why would employers do that, right? So obviously there are going to be individuals who are just racist because they're racist. We're not going to change that. Like, so some people are going to make that choice. We can't really change that, right? So. But there might also just be some, maybe they're like, well, generally speaking, people from this culture are more familiar to me and the rest of the team, and we know how to work together, and it just makes things work more easily and smoothly, or whatever. Like, or there might be like things. There's a lot of things that are cultural that become ascribed to race, right? Like where like. And that's the whole point that Thomas Sowell makes, and he makes a lot of points, but that's the main point in that book of white rednecks and red liberals, or red liberals,
black rednecks and white liberals.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
So his main point is this: is that what we call kind of black culture in this country is really Southern culture, because most black people lived in the South, and that culture is really a culture that comes from the south of Britain. So from white people in the south of Britain who lived in this way where they would, like, they get fairly, I forget, I'm just going to be paraphrasing here, but there's some aspects of like, they're more easily offended. It's like, you look at me funny, I'm gonna smack you up or like beat you up or something like that, or there's kind of this like honor thing going on there. That's where people get offended, or there's like not valuing education in the same way, and like other things, other cultural traits. He breaks them all down in the book. But the point is that this is really like a white culture coming from the south of Britain that then gets moved to America, because most of these people who come from the south of Britain end up immigrating to are migrating to the southern part of the states. They have slaves, and then they bring the black people, and then so all of this has nothing to do with race or color of skin or origin. It's all about culture, and cultural differences are important. They make a difference, and we can't gloss over that fact. So maybe someone has learned that, well, we all have these stereotypes, right? Germans are good at engineering, and
people from Denmark code.
Exactly, they make programming languages, right?
Like all of them, right? Like 50% of all.
Exactly. Yeah, we all make programming languages, yeah, and so on and so forth. Like we make those judgments, and we all do this profiling, right? We all profile other people when we meet them.
Sure.
It's what we do.
There's a quote by Sojourner Truth. It's one of my favorites, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it lockstep, but something to the effect of, we're all victims of our own experience. No one can eliminate prejudice, just recognize it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think so many people are unwilling to admit their own prejudices.
Right.
And they're the biggest part of the problem.
Right. Well, and prejudice is a good thing. It allows us to function. We wouldn't be able to function without it.
You need it for survival. Like it's 100 million years worth of evolutionary natural selection built into your psyche. Yeah, you absolutely positively, because prejudice, it's really just, it's an A/B test, right? It's like when I eat this berry, I shit myself to death, and when I eat this berry, then I feel good and I live. Right. And slowly but surely you start to you just build the ability to differentiate between things.
And when you see a berry, you're like, that looks like a raspberry. It's probably a raspberry. You don't have to go and analyze the chemical composition of every single berry. You make a decision in a split second. Yeah.
And you apply that to everything. You apply it to people and places and events and circumstances and words.
Right.
I think it's absurd not to allow for the human condition in the way that we interface with each other. Mm-hmm. Like the whole don't judge a book by its cover. It's like, well, yeah, that's something I teach my kid. I have a 3-year-old right now, and that's something he needs to hear because, philosophically it's the correct approach. But the truth is you can't live life by not doing that.
We all judge books by their covers. You don't have enough
time to go in and dig into every single situation and learn everything about everybody.
And the reason that we have that proverb, I suppose, is that a proverb? Don't judge a book by its cover. Isn't it aphorism, proverb? Both of them? I don't know.
Sure.
But the reason we have that is that it is useful to remind ourselves from time to time that, things are not exactly what they might seem.
Yeah.
But most of the time we're gonna have to live by that assumption until we have more information.
Right, until we have more data. And honestly, when it's important to collect the data too, if I have this happened to me recently. I took an Uber to the airport, and my Uber driver seemed like a total just D-bag. Like he was aloof, and he was on the phone the first half, and just this prick. And so I didn't make it a point to engage with him like I usually do, because I like to chop people up a lot like you do. And then halfway through the ride, he apologized to me. He goes, "Man, I'm so sorry if I seem like I'm in a bad mood. I just lost my job." And then instantly I was like, oh, paradigm shift. Felt bad for the guy. Talked to him a little bit. He ended up being really cool to talk to. He was a civil engineer, just really brilliant guy, and just had a bad roll of it. And I felt bad for 7 seconds. And then I sort of reprimanded myself for the guilt. And I thought, I can't afford to dig into every single Uber driver that I encounter. No. That just sort of is what it is. And so I don't know how many times you need to have that experience before you start to, you have to play like the cost to benefit ratio game. Sometimes you just make a snap judgment and stick to it.
Yeah, but you can also just be like, hey, I don't feel like engaging right now. You don't have to make him wrong for it. You don't have to say, oh, he's a stupid fucking idiot, or whatever, right? I think that's the part, recognizing that everybody has shit, everybody has suffering, everybody has pain, and then this person who treats you roughly, it might actually, it's pretty much always going to be because that person is in pain, right? And just recognizing that, I think, is super helpful. But it doesn't make it your problem or your obligation to go fix it or engage with them or whatever.
I have this. I don't know if it's a good habit or a bad habit, but I have an interesting habit where I take it upon myself to get people to talk to me. Mm-hmm. And I think it might be there's a level of insecurity there, and maybe even a level of narcissism, where I just want to figure out what people are about. And the more I can learn and the more they open up, and the closer the connection in the shortest period of time, it's almost a game, you know what I mean? Like you gamify it. There's a joke about it in Fight Club where he talks about single serving friends. And I really like the single serving friend game, where you go, you meet somebody, you learn a whole bunch of stuff, and then you never see them again. And it's something I think I'm pretty good at, but I also wonder where the value in it is, like, because you expel so much energy, and then there's rarely any takeaway, no long-term benefit. And I do that a lot. A lot of it, I think, is a byproduct of how much I travel.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think I'm with it. I mean, I like that. Personally, I think it just makes life more rich and more interesting. And,
Yeah,
and sometimes you end up exchanging information and you stay in touch and you realize, that was really all there was. It was that encounter there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this is what we're here to do in some ways, right? Is to connect with other people.
Man, I'm having trouble with that too. I'm 33 now, which is a weird age for me for whatever reason. I had like this quarter life crisis, I call it. And I've been about breadth, like how much I can do, how many people I can meet, how many friends I have, how many businesses I own.
Use like quarter life crisis because like that means you're gonna make.
I'm gonna live forever. Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to live to 140 at a minute. What is that? 131 or something? 33 times 4. 132.
32, yeah.
I don't have God in a very concrete way, and so death kind of worries me. I just know I need to live forever. But my life has been about like quantity, and then real recently, around the birth of my second kid, I started realizing that I don't do a whole lot in the way of quality. So I've got a ton of like acquaintances. I just hit my microphone. You probably heard that. But not a lot of like really deep personal friendships. And then I've got these two little guys at home that rely on me for everything. And it occurred like right away, I realized, that's not going to gel with my schedule because I go out and I do all this random bullshit that may or may not serve me. And so I've actually been trying to like decrease everything, like less of everything. But then really emphasize the value that it can bring. So less businesses, but more, more value provided to my customers, more profit, more scale, less people, but more valuable conversations,
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense or even why I got off on that tangent, but you just said something.
I love it. It's like one of the things I find fascinating is like friction, right? We're so much about eliminating friction, but actually when there is friction is when we start to have these real connections. Like when the subway breaks down or something happens, right? That's when people start talking to each other and actually engaging and relating. I saw a Broadway show here in New York called Come From Away, which is about 9/11 and a bunch of planes, I forget, like 15, 20, 30 planes, whatever, that were diverted to Newfoundland Islands, that like top far right northeast corner of Canada, way up there, right, close to Greenland, and like where the flights come over, the transatlantic flights, and so they were diverted there, and people were stuck there for like 4 or 5 days, and like at first everybody's like, what is this, and why don't we know, is nobody telling us anything, and like what's gonna happen, like this small town grows from like 5,000, 6,000 people to 15,000, and they have to find food and shelter and everybody, and the bus drivers are in a strike, and they have to like put the strike on hold to bus people around. But then there was a reunion 10 years later where they came back and they met up, and they were like, lifelong friendships being created and partnerships, people getting married and having babies and shit.
Awesome.
But these situations are really critical. Like this is where life happens, right? We're so busy making other plans, and life is what happens while we're busy making other plans. I think it's really worth acknowledging. Let me show you here, because when I was a kid, one of the large presences in my life was my uncle. This is my uncle's dad. I think I showed you this book, right?
You did. It's awesome. It's like a history, right?
History of the family of the, and these are, so this is the guy. Let me see here. The guy there.
In the military garb.
Yeah, that's my uncle.
Yeah.
So he died last year, and his wife was standing next to him there. She just died a couple of weeks ago, and that's the funeral I went to. She was ready to go. And they lived a full life. He smoked and drank and he
Had
lived
at
life
it.
to the fullest. But so one thing that really stuck me. So I actually stayed in her house for the funeral with my mom. So the house was empty. And there was a bed that she'd lied in and died in, and everything was in there. And my uncle's office, and he died in May last year, so he's been dead for almost a year. His office was completely untouched. There was like his cigars and his cigarettes and his lighters and his ashtray. The ashtray had been cleaned, but the computer was there, all his books and the annual reports for his various companies and all that stuff, and a huge case of his business cards.
Oh, that's
Were
awesome.
there. So I snatched one. And it was just, I don't know, I think it really hit me and threw me into a little bit of a crisis. I have these like crises of a meaning every so often, like multiple times a year, these mini crises. I think they're a good thing. They're a natural part of life where you take things up and you reevaluate and you're like, hey, what am I doing with my life? And, what kind of changes do I need to make? But this really hit me in terms of like these people, they were billionaires by at least Danish kroner standards, so like hundreds of millions of dollars of net worth. And they built all this, and now they're just, poof, they're gone, right?
Right.
And it's like, whoa. And I know it's such a basic thing, but it's one of those things that we keep forgetting, right? The whole culture we have around death, we hide it away. We only talk about it, and we're like,
Oh, I think about it all the time.
Yeah.
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 It's just, what are we doing? What is it that we're creating? This, like, it's so easy to fall into this trap of like, oh, I just need to graduate the next year in school. I just need to get from kindergarten to elementary school to high school to the college to job to save for retirement. And finally you retire, and then you're like poor health and,
Yeah, and then you die.
like,
It's like,
exactly.
so I raced here. Yeah.
For what?
Stephen Covey does this really good, this little allegorical tale in Seven Habits where he talks about the Mexican fisherman. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Truncated for 7 seconds. This Harvard business guy goes to Mexico, sees a fisherman coming in at noon, and says, "Dude, you got to go out and fish. And if you fish, you'll make more money, and you'll get more boats, and you'll get employees. And then you go to the market, and you'll expand." And the guy's like, "Oh, okay, well then what?" And then he's like, "Then you get to go and you get to move to a beach town, and you get to quit working at noon." And the guy's like, "I'm already kind of doing that." And I think that this country in particular, whenever I travel, I'm always struck by how little people work. We were in Italy, and those fools close up halfway through the day and walk away. I mean, you think the Spanish take siestas? You should see the Italians in the middle of Rome. You know what I mean? Like they just close up and you'll see like a little sign on the door like out, and the first inclination is like, well, I'm here for business. It's because we're Americans and we're self-involved that way. But then you look at it and you're like, good for you guys. Like, who gives a shit? Close up for an hour and go hang out with your kids. Why wouldn't you do that?
Right. Well, or go to a restaurant and have lunch with wine, right?
Yeah. Go day drink. Yeah. I mean, the Irish are interesting that way too. When you're in Ireland, I mean, it'll be 11 a.m. and the waitress stone-faced, you'll be like, "Can I get you anything to drink, dear?" And you're like, "Okay, the stories about you guys are true," but they're just all about it.
She was just referring to water.
Yeah,
sparkling or still?
No, she was not. Water was there, Calvin. The Guinness was in the background. I'm telling you, that stuff over there.
Well, Guinness kind of tastes like cold coffee, so that does make sense.
It's amazing. And Guinness is, this is pretentious. Guinness is different in Ireland than it is anywhere else because the way
it definitely is. I don't like Guinness. I mildly tolerate Guinness in Ireland. I haven't been there in 30 years, but that's my. I must be a little more than that, or less than that. Anyway, but.
I was about to say you'd have been 4, so you were drinking Guinness when you were 4.
Dude, I just turned 44 the other day, last week.
No way.
Yeah, I'm 44.
I knew it was your birthday. I thought you were my age.
No, I'm not.
You look great.
Thank you.
It must be shaving too. I think shaving makes everyone look younger.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do this thing now.
Yeah, that thing just, I don't know, that makes you look like you ride a motorcycle and might beat me up.
Yeah, or just fuck you over somehow. Yeah.
It's just rugged.
Yeah. Or like I'm preparing for some film role or something.
Yeah. There you go. Getting in character.
Shooting something down there today. Oh, there's still there. There's like a spotlight on a film
Oh,
set down here.
right outside your window.
Well, it's pretty far away. It would take me like 20 minutes to, yeah, well, around. It would take me at least 15 minutes to walk there. But it's still like when you look at it, it's like blaring right in your eye. It's got to be super powerful. Like
Yeah, those things
all
are no
these
joke.
photons that they shoot at me. And there, we should definitely ban photons. I think we should ban photons. I think that would be the solution.
You're just getting radiated the whole time.
Exactly, photons are awful. So, back to the thing that the argument that won me over was like if like back to the sexism and racism
Oh,
and
yeah, yeah.
business and quotas and all that stuff, right? Like if like and the VC like diversity and all that, right? If women and or black people, if venture capital firms with more women or more black people or whatever it is do that much better, you would think that someone would start one, hire a ton of
Right.
women and black people, and just be the other guys at their game, right? Unless like like you have to really believe that there's such a like a tight knit network, a club or something, and they're just keeping the other people out or what? Like, yeah, why wouldn't? Like I was reading Warren Farrell. We talked about him as well the
Yep.
other day. Like, if companies could hire women for 10% less, and the women would do the same job, like for doing the same job, pay them 10% less. Why wouldn't they do that and just profit the
Yeah.
other guys out of the market?
The path is in the math. I believe that. I think Peterson talks about how the hyper liberals, because they believe it's all about power. This gets really interesting. It's cyclical logic, but it makes a lot of sense. Because they believe it's all about power, power becomes kind of the only thing they believe in, and so power is what they try to use in order to enforce their like egalitarian truth. And I think what you're saying, and what I also believe, is it's not about power. There's a natural, for the most part, meritocratic ecosystem. There's differences. I think if you're born to a wealthy family in a wealthy area, yeah, you have a leg up. But again, what are we going to do about that? You can't
Yeah.
legislate around it.
And that's what parenting is about. Like that's what
Yes,
parents
that's
do.
exactly right.
They do
I
everything they
time my
can to give their
children's
kids a leg
birth.
up, or they don't, right?
Both of my kids are born in April by design because there's a statistically higher likelihood of success. There are more professional athletes, Nobel Prize laureates, generals, CEOs. And so my wife and I thought about that and timed the birth of our children. Like, you want to give your kids the leg up.
Holy, really?
Yeah, I know it's weird, but
It's
go
a
read
little
Malcolm
weird.
Gladwell's The Outliers. Yeah,
Interesting.
I'm either gonna destroy my children, like they're gonna be on a therapist couch being like, my dad was a weirdo, or they're gonna be superhuman. Because I have all these just ideas. I think I know how to do this.
Maybe they're
I'm,
just going to be human.
yeah,
I
hopefully first.
saw Scott Adams the other day talk about artificial intelligence and why we're not really closer to, or why we're having trouble creating artificial intelligence. I think that was his point with computers and all that stuff, right? And what he said was just a more clever way to say it than I've heard before. Like, it has always boggled my mind, these people who think that we can just like put everything that's you on a hard drive and store it somewhere and then restore it into a robot or something. Because like, what about the body and the emotions and everything else? Like, this is what makes me me. You can't just like cut the physical aspect out of it. When you eat cheeseburgers every day for a month, you're going to get depressed. These things, work together. It's how it is. So anyway, so what he's saying is like, that's because humans are not really intelligent. Like, we're not really rational in that sense of like, we do things because we figured it out. Like, you doing what you're doing is definitely an outlier, right? Like, most people don't plan the birth of their children to that extent. They get hot and bothered and then they have sex and then they, or whatever. Like, and like everything is that happens, like, people keep doing things that are bad. They smoke not because they rationalize that like, this is going to have this effect and then I'm going to do that and this is going to happen. That's not how people do what they do in pretty much any aspect of life. There's a few aspects where people will sit down and actually think things through and be intelligent, rational in that sense, but it is the minority of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great argument. I hadn't thought of that. You can't replicate the human experience. I mean, we're also finite too. So if we created AI, what needs or wants would it have? Because it doesn't have the same limitation. It doesn't have mortality per se.
Hmm.
And I think most of what we're trying to do, going back to what you were saying earlier, like we're going to die. So those of us that create, you're trying to create, I think, so you have something that lives beyond you.
Hmm.
And so much of our impetus and motivation is built on that construct. And I don't think a computer would need anything.
Or just they're just the need to survive and stay alive, right here and
Yeah.
now. No,
But would
in
it even
addition,
need that? Like we need that because that's I think a genetic predisposition.
mhm.
And that I think people can actually be born without that too. You get folks that are not quite as interested in their own survival.
Well,
Uh,
but if they're not, they're gonna die, right? They would die very,
well,
very
they do.
quickly because
Yeah.
well, they won't eat or they
Right.
won't like whatever, like yeah.
Yeah.
But that seems to be
Yeah.
a pretty, basic human or biological. Every biological animal has that too.
Yeah. But
They're just
I would challenge whether or not if we did create artificial intelligence, I don't know that the need to live would come with it. I think that
no,
we apply, because we're empaths, we apply that need to the AI just with an assumption, because for us it's like it's one of the most basic assumptions, right?
right,
It's just survival. But why would a computer have that want or need unless
no.
we somehow found a way to program it in it?
I mean, to me, it's like, well, it won't like this idea that you can create these artificial intelligence devices that are kind of like humans in some way. I think is nonsense. I think we
But
can definitely create things that we can call them or intelligent, or we can call it
there's machine
AI or
learning.
whatever.
Right?
It's just
Yeah, a computer can figure out get
well,
to
it's
the point faster.
yeah, it's a different kind of it's still an algorithm. It's just a different kind of algorithm that has more complexities and it makes it really hard for us to understand exactly what's going on. But
Yeah.
it's still an algorithm that operates on data and has certain outputs. It's just that the rules are not written in the typical way. They're
Right.
kind of built up over time.
Well, I think that they're built to build. So AI in my mind becomes more likely when the machine can create its own, like it's an algorithmic scale. Because right now machines exist within the confines that we've provided. This is happening with Google AdWords right now. It's really interesting. It'll put me out of business in 2 years. Google paid $500 million for this machine learning mechanism. We got to see the guy who built it speak at Traffic and Conversion, and it beat the world's greatest chess player right away.
Mm-hmm.
And then it beat the computer that beat the world's greatest chess player in 9 days. Mm-hmm. And then the next time it played it and beat it in 1. Mm-hmm. And the next time it played it beat it like in 45 seconds. But then here's where it gets really interesting. Then they had the first computer teach the second computer how to play chess. Mm-hmm. And then the next time they played, it went back to like 9 or 10 or 11 days or something. And I might be getting that story just a little off in terms of the dates. But once that happened, that to me was really interesting. The fact that the first computer can learn from the second computer and then teach the second computer enough to make it competitive again. Like now there's like a quantification of intelligence, mm-hmm. which isn't artificial intelligence yet, but it just got a lot closer than I thought we were now. Mm-hmm. But again, it's all within this little box, which was chess. Like
right.
The computer can't turn around and be like, okay, well now I'm going to play Parcheesi, right? We'd have to code that in.
Right.
And the day the computer can teach itself Parcheesi, then I think we're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, you have to learn it too, right? In order to play it. I don't even know what it is, but
Parcheesi, it's like a 5-year-old's board game. I'm just being funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. No, but I think the confusion is like the Turing test and like when a computer can fool a human into thinking that it's a computer or human, that kind of thing. Like this idea that we can build machines, robots that are more human than humans or as humans, human as humans. I think that's fundamentally flawed. I think that's fundamentally misunderstanding what it means to be a human.
Well, I think we could build robots that, like you just said, can trick humans into believing that they're more human.
Yeah.
But that in and of itself doesn't qualify as human. Humanity is defined by limitation. I don't think that we'll ever get there. Elon talks a lot about AI. He goes on and on about how careful we need to be and how it's going to destroy us. Mm-hmm. But I mean,
just the simple fact of like like people get scared about AI taking over the world and like subjugating humans, and now we're gonna be the slaves or the serfs of the AI and all that stuff, right?
Right.
I like my nightmare scenario would be, some rogue power creating a million tiny self-controlled drones that are weaponized, right?
Sure.
That just like swarm all over New York. It's like, what the fuck are you gonna do?
What are you gonna do?
They're not centrally controlled. Like who that
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In New York, I don't know. In Arizona, I can tell you that everybody here has like 50 guns, so they're just gonna take them all right out of the sky.
But the thing is, if there's enough of him,
Oh no,
it
yeah, I'm
means
being
nothing.
funny too. It's
Yeah,
just,
yeah,
yeah, the state is very well armed.
yeah. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of a commitment here. I'm with you. I think that, technology in the wrong hands, artificial or not, every software engineer I know is a prepper, kind of without question. In as much as, I know them closely enough to know their personal habits. But every software engineer I know is a prepper, and I think that's really interesting because every software engineer I know, you included, really knows how fragile the infrastructure is. Like the computers that deliver our water and our electricity. It's old, it's antiquated. It was built by RFP 20 years ago, and it's been kept up on the same bullshit system. And so the fact that every software engineer I know is a prepper just lets me know, like,
How do you define prepper?
I
Am
don't
I a
know.
prepper?
I don't know. I don't know you well enough to ask these questions, but I think if you have 3 days worth of, I'd say a week's worth of food, 3 days worth of water, and just a plan. If you just know, like, hey, if everything went to shit, here's what I would do, here's what I'd go, here's who I'd call. If you're prepared for an elongated emergency, I don't mean like the power went out and you have candles. I mean like, 72 hours worth of chaos. And then I think you start to enter prepper territory. And then, then of course, if you own like, bullion or numismatic coins or something, then you're for sure a prepper.
If I what?
If you own silver, gold,
Right.
precious metals,
Yeah.
like potassium iodide for nuclear attacks.
Right. Yeah. No. I'm not. I guess I'm not really a prepper, though. I may be like a prepper in prep. It's something that I've definitely thought of, and like I have a company and bank accounts and everything back in Denmark as well. And if at some point I was going to close it, and I'm like, no, I'm not so sure. I think it's pretty nice to have like a setup and like keep my Danish passport and all that. Well, it's the only passport I have, so. But these days, I'm pretty happy to have another citizenship than non-U.S. citizenship. This thing is pretty convenient. I could see. I have been thinking maybe like take out like $10,000 in cash and just have it lying around somewhere in the mattress just in case. Because like if there's a run on the banks or the banks go down, physical cash is going to be precious.
That should be. And you also, if the dollar collapses, and the dollar should collapse, in my opinion, I don't know why it hasn't already. You want silver. You don't want gold, because gold, it's $2,000 for a little coin. You can't trade for that for anything. You want silver because silver is easier to conduct micro commerce. So if you need to buy
silver coins,
just buy silver. Don't buy numismatic coins. My opinion. If you're doing this
don't buy what?
Shipping, don't buy like the collector coins. Like you can get specialized silver coins that cost more per ounce. Just buy straight silver bullion. I think silver right now is at $17 an ounce. I'll tell you. And I also think silver is being kept artificially low. I don't think. I know.
Why and by whom?
There's two brothers out of England. Yeah, 1641 per ounce, and they've so much as said it. Like the organization that they're sponsoring. I don't even know if they're still alive, but that family has just, the same way Carnegie consolidated steel, these guys are consolidating silver.
And so they're keeping the prices low.
Yeah, well, and they're doing that, I think, by design, because the minute there's a run on silver, I think that A, consolidation gets difficult, and then B, you end up having like weird you end up having weird fluctuations in the market. And so if they can keep the price of silver low, because silver is not a utilitarian metal, if they can keep the price of silver low, then it's easier, I think, for them to control it. Maybe, I don't know, but buy some silver bullion, buy $1,000 worth of silver, and just put it under your bed,
and then buy a plane ticket out of here, with silver.
Lanes will be down, dude. You'll be if you actually needed by the time you need bullion, everything's gone to absolute hell.
Yeah.
Don't buy bullion if you don't think it's possible. And here's the thing: is I'm not crazy. I don't think like the world's gonna end or zombie apocalypse or whatever. Here's what I do think though. I think that it is possible for grocery stores to run out of food because they're all on like a 3-day, especially here. I don't know what what your agrarian situation is, but everything in Arizona is trucked in, and grocery stores have 72 hours worth of food. And if anything went wrong, there's just going to be an instant run on grocery stores. So the minute that happens and you have an inability to bring a credit card or cash somewhere, then the next step is a subsequent breakdown. And I don't know what happens then, right? Like I don't know if even if silver is going to be worth anything, if people are just going to run around shooting people for their shit. But I do know that there's a few steps you can take in a few different directions to just make sure you're at least semi-prepared. So if the grocery stores run out of food, then I want to be able to have a few options. I would like some ammunition. I would like some silver, and I want to know just where I'm going to be, like that I can hang tight for a collection of time without having to venture out anywhere. So like you can go on Amazon and get 30 days worth of food for $100 in a tub that'll last you 30 years, and there's no reason not to do that because there's only 72 hours worth of food at a grocery store. So if there ever wasn't a run on a grocery store, like you're going to be happy that you have that little freeze-dried bag of food.
What's that called? What's it called on Amazon?
Man, I don't know. I just bought my dad one.
Survival food.
Yeah, 30 days worth of food is $100, or maybe it's $150 now. I paid $100.
1 month emergency food supply of healthy, freeze-dried survival food.
Yeah, here's the one I got. Augustin Farms. They had the best reviews. I'm not an affiliate. Yeah, 30 days, and I think it lasts 20 years. It'll last, up to a 20-year shelf life. I mean, it's probably sodium heavy. It's not good for you, but if you have...
It's going to keep you alive.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and I mean, accessibility of water is even more important. So the other thing to buy is there's this bag you can put in your bathtub, and you hook it up to the nozzle of your bathtub, and then you run your bath, and it fills up this bag with a dispensary tube with however many gallons of water your bathtub can fill. I don't know what. And especially if you don't have a water heater and living in New York, I bet you don't. At least it's accessible to you personally, like your own individual one in your place. Then go get that bag, and if you have water and food and then maybe some candlelight, you should be good, again, for just a short period. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm weirding you and probably all your listeners.
Well, and the water, so do you do that when, like, do you need to keep that there all the time? How do you use your bathtub now?
Well, no, yeah, I just keep, it comes in a box, and so I just keep the box under the sink, and then if anything ever goes wrong where,
there's water and you might, there's still water, but you might run out of it.
Just go hook it up, fill it up. It needs to be preemptive, which is dangerous. The other thing that if you want to, go get some water purification tablets. They're like $10 for a whole little tube. And then if you don't have water purification tablets, I've heard, I don't know how true this is, but I've heard you can actually clean water with gasoline. Mm-hmm. And it's like 4 drops of gasoline and a gallon of water, and then you get to clean your water. But have some water, have some food, have some fuel, whatever that is. Candlelight is like the most rudimentary, but if you want to get some of those like things that food that caterers use, that'll help you heat up your stored food. And then, depending on your philosophical beliefs, you want to have something to defend yourself with. And at that point, I think you're good. Maybe a hand crank AM radio so you know what's going on in the outside world. But that's my prepping lesson for today.
All right. Interesting, yeah. I've been following this guy Simon Black, Sovereign Man. Are you familiar?
I think so. I think my buddy John keeps telling me to listen to him.
Yeah.
He has a podcast?
I think there's a podcast. There's a newsletter. There's almost like a daily newsletter. They're actually I learned about them because they were looking into Simplero. They were going to use Simplero for their newsletter. They're using Infusionsoft today, and they send out at that point they said 100,000 people 30 days a week, a month pretty much. Oh, so wow. I did the math on that. And I'm like, that's a lot of email. That's going to cost a little more than we had anticipated. So they stayed with Infusionsoft, but I started talking to them a little bit. I haven't talked to them in a while. Good people, but like that, it's like his whole thing is a plan B. Like, what happens when things go south, right? And we don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know what it's going to look like. It might never happen, but the likelihood is definitely there, right?
Well, I mean, a lot of preppers, I think, actually kind of want it to happen. because they're weird that way, and it appeals to a very specific type of person. I think that's why
Right.
Pepper's such a bad name. I don't want it to happen at all. I do think though that it's well within the realms of possibility that something goes wrong for a short period of time. I don't think we're talking apocalypse.
No, but I mean, so one of the things that like more and more, what's the picture that's becoming clear in my mind, is how massively off the rails we've gone in this world in terms of like the policies, the how much we interfere in the market, in everything, and how every single interference makes matters worse. Yep. And then when we interfere and it makes matters worse, we interfere more. And when we interfere and it works the way we want it in the short term, then we do more of it. And when we interfere and it doesn't work the way we want it in the short term, we do more of it. Yeah. And then when it has negative consequences, we do more interference. I've been reading Nassim Taleb recently as well, and he talks about like interventionistas and like every time you intervene, there's risks involved, and like you're making some things worse, even if there's like, what was it like? One example you mentioned was mammograms. So mammograms, screening women's breasts for cancer, the ones that they catch early, there's a higher survival rate there. But overall, of all the women that they screen versus women that don't get screened, there's a higher mortality rate among the people who are being screened. So screening these, so these like mandatory mammograms or widespread mammograms are essentially killing women, because there's side effects to everything.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's
and
interesting.
And politicians don't, they feel like their job is to intervene. Like this, we talked about the GDPR policy, right? Like we need to intervene and like make more rules and regulations, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. If you look back, so Milton Friedman was giving a talk about when he was graduated high school in 1928, the percentage of the total income of the country, so essentially GDP, that was controlled or spent by the government was about 10%. It's total amount spent. Of that, 3% was like 3 out of the 10 were federal, and the rest were local.
State-based,
yeah. State or city or county or whatever. And now it's something like 50-something, 60%, especially if you include everything where the government mandates you to spend your money as opposed to sucking it up in taxes. And that's not counting inflation and printing money, which is also a way of spending our money, right? So now the number is something like 50, 60%, and the federal portion of that is even higher. And it seems to me that really kind of, all this interference, like we talked about affirmative action, Thomas Sowell talks about rent regulation, right? So New York is one of the most highly rent-regulated cities in the world. Is this rental market flexible? Hell no. It's the opposite of flexible. Is it cheap? Hell no. Like every time you mandate that a certain thing must have a lower price than the market, then you're making people consume more than they actually need, or they would if it was more expensive, right? So people live fewer families to a home, or fewer people to a home, or they have an extra home, house, et cetera, because it's cheaper. And supply goes down because there are people who could be renting a room or whatever. They're like, it's not worth it because it doesn't pay that much, et cetera. So like, and if you artificially make the price higher, you make a separate set of problems. But like, the point is like, really, it seems to me that what we need to do is cut back all of this and just have like very, very basic government, very simple. Just start over. Right.
We're too far down let me just say that I absolutely agree with you. As a young man, I was a militant libertarian, almost to the point of being an anarcho-capitalist. And I don't think I'm there anymore. But I do agree less far less government is a necessity. The problem is like, we've opened Pandora's box, and you're not going to get rid of them without blood in the streets.
But that's where the preppers come in, right? That's exactly that. Like, but the thing is, this thing can't continue. Right?
Oh, it can't sustain. It's absolutely unsustainable, and they've said it themselves. Look at our debt. Our debt is, you'll never pay it off.
There's no way.
Yeah, crossed the threshold. Like, it's gone forever now. Mm-hmm. Which should have been the catalytic moment when the dollar collapsed, and I don't know why that hasn't happened yet. It boggles my mind that you can still hand somebody this arbitrary piece of paper for stuff, and then you go spend your entire life working for that same piece of paper. It's absurd. But yeah, I think it can't be rolled back. I think it needs to fail. Like, we need to watch it collapse, and then
I think that wouldn't that be exactly why some of these preppers want the system to fail, want this to happen.
Yeah, the problem with a failed system, though, is especially the way that the United States is segmented right now. You're going to have really clear winners and really clear losers. Mm-hmm. I think you might have told me this, Calvin. I don't remember where I heard it, so don't quote me on it because it's not very well cited. But 50% of the population lives in cities along the coast, which means that they're getting a lot of intake, probably from Middle America. The minute there's a collapse, I think the natural human inclination is to insulate. Right, so then you have small micro governments, probably, as big as a few city blocks in some instances, but then we'll say like cities and states or cities and counties and states, and then when that happens, now you have interstate trade being naturally regulated by like a more organic capitalist ecosystem. But where it's dangerous in my mind is all of those great big cities. LA, San Francisco, Seattle, New York, they're at a massive disadvantage because the things that are of value to barter, I don't think those people are actually stockpiling. Mm-hmm. They don't have, fresh water, massive amounts of food, ammunition, precious metals. They probably have a lot of like stuff, like a lot of cars, let's say, but they don't have the things that in a barter situation are really going to work out for them. All the tobacco is being stored somewhere else. All the coffee is being stored somewhere else. All the things that you would trade in a barter situation. And so you have 50% of the U.S. population with zero quote-unquote voting rights because in an anarcho-capitalist system, your voting rights are your tangible goods. And when you have that, when you have people that no longer can eat, then you have like straight-up blood in the streets, right? Like rioting and mass migration and I think that could be really dangerous. So I don't know that I want it to like burn all the way down. Maybe it'd be better for humanity in the long run, but it'd be scary to live through. What I would like to see, though, is I would like to see, and God forgive me for saying this, I'm afraid to say these words, man, because I'm going to be quoted later and somebody's going to nail me to the wall. I would like to see some level of federal collapse. Mm-hmm. I would like to see the world see what happens when we don't have the federal government, because the truth is we don't need them. Mm-hmm. Like, every time they shut down because they can't approve the budget, life goes on. You know what I mean? Like,
everybody's fine.
Everybody's fine. So I just want everybody to like, oh, those douchebags don't do anything. Mm-hmm. And I'd like them to go away or just get nailed or for the American people to finally like wake up and say, yeah, we're not paying for this shit anymore.
Right. I think my ideal scenario would be that we actually elect someone as president, as leader, who can persuade with his word or her word, like what we have right now, except smart. No, but someone who's like,
dude, I think he's brilliant. He's tanking the market and then buying up all that shit and then letting it come back up organically. I think he acts the fool, but on the back end, him and his cronies have to be making billions.
I think he's
manufactured.
Huh?
The trade war with China, that's manufactured. Like, he's doing this by design. It's all
of course
very intentional.
I think so. The way that Scott Adams puts it is like everything he does is negotiation.
Yep.
Right. So I mean, and as far as I know, there is no trade war right now. They're just talking about it.
Yeah, but in talking about it, look at the market fluctuation though, and I mean it's pretty easy to it's a predictive indicator, so it's pretty easy to know what it's going to do.
Right. My point is like he is smart in his own way. He's not well read, and I don't see him as a leader of integrity, and he's not the kind of leader that I'm
not defending him, by the way. If he died of syphilis tomorrow, I'd light a candle to the gods. Like, I can't stand the guy.
Yeah.
I just don't
funny.
underestimate him.
He's entertaining.
Yeah.
But I'm not too terribly worried about him being Hitler or like destroying the world or whatever. I think he's doing many splendid things. Anyway, point being, a leader who can. These things are not hard to understand. It's actually not very hard to understand when you introduce rent control. It actually makes things worse.
More difficult.
You just have to explain it, and just like it's common logic, right? If you're being paid less for this apartment, or if the fact that you renovate this building doesn't mean that you can raise the rent, why would you do that? Like, put yourself in the shoes of like the person who is the landlord here doing this thing, and like just walk people through it. People want to understand it, and you're just like, all right, so here's my opponent who says, yeah, he will make rents cheaper by blah blah blah, and like, how is that? It's just not how it works. It's not going to happen.
There's a meme you like.
Yeah.
Sorry, keep going.
No, I'm just like someone who actually just says the truth to people. I may be naive in this, believing in the like nobody's ever gone broke underestimating the intelligence of the American people, as P.T. Barnum said.
So I'm gonna just send you a link. Have you seen the? It's just this little comic strip, "Comforting Lies versus Unpleasant Truths." It's just two guys sitting in a booth, and I think this defines the. And I wouldn't call it even the American disposition. I think this is just people. I think this is why certain types of, not to knock religion because I think it has its benefits, but certain types of religion are so pervasive. People, even when they know it's a lie, would prefer just live with the lie than go out and find a really uncomfortable truth.
Got it. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I'm going to just see if I can pull in the browser so other people can see it here. There we go. No, wrong one. Wrong browser. Come on. That one. Here.
Yeah. So somebody said in a democratic system, this is why democracy is flawed. And we're not a democracy, I know that, but we're as close as I think you can get except a pirate ship, right? So in a democratic system, the government can only be as effective as the aggregate average of the populace. Mm-hmm. And what you just said, my challenge to you is this. I don't think enough people are smart enough, or maybe smart enough is the wrong word. I don't think enough people care enough to invest the time in understanding an argument even as complex as what you just put forth, which isn't really that complex.
It's not complex at all, no.
The people that win, and this I'm stealing this from a guy who owns Story Brand. I forget his name, but he's talking about marketing. Look at everybody that's won every election for like the last 50 years. Their narrative is that big. Trump's was make America great again, right? Obama was hope and change.
Build that wall.
Yeah, like everything that we vote for is compressed into like this little teeny tiny silo that a toddler, and I'm not even being facetious, like a toddler can understand. Mm-hmm. Anytime we go beyond a toddler's ability to understand, our populace abandons that narrative. Mitt Romney, despite not potentially maybe not being a human being, would have been a great president. He was brilliant, and he had some really good ideas. But every time he put forth a plan, he needed a whiteboard. No bullshit. No, not joking. He would get up on the stage with a whiteboard trying to explain his plans, and it was like, dude, you cannot do that. You need 2 words or 5 words at most. W was great at that. Like the president you want to have beer with. He just had these really, I think what his whole thing was like lower taxes. He jumped on the whole Reaganomics, whatever. That micro communication is where people vote. And that's actually another reason for smaller governments, because then what ends up happening is the states where you have people that don't want to invest the time end up, in this weird, shitty situation. In the states where people do prosper, right? They move forward and move on. I carry the copy of the Constitution in my backpack. Like, my vote should count more than a guy who doesn't, but I get nullified instantly by every Tom, Dick, and Harry that has an opinion. I read the budget every year. So I think we do lead some level of meritocratic society. People don't like bringing this up.
Why? Yeah. So that's just. I mean, this is never going to happen either. But
well, it did. I mean, it used to be landowners.
Huh?
So landowners used to be the only people that can vote. Now that sounds elitist, but it makes sense.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think not landowners, but have some test for people.
But then here's the real scary question: who writes that test?
Right.
Because I mean, if you lend it to the academics, it's going to be hyper liberal. Mm-hmm. and go way too off the rails. Yeah, who generates that, like, what is your vote worth thing? That conversation gets really interesting but really scary.
Do you think transgender is a
Yeah, fill out here. What
These
pronoun
are,
should you be using? Yeah, yeah, it's funny. Because the problem with meritocratic anything is you have to define what constitutes merit. And that for you and me are totally different things, and you and I align on a lot. Imagine what merit means for people that are, on polar opposites of any spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why, man, not to keep beating this drum, dude. I'm sorry if I'm boring the shit out of everybody. That's why I think that small business, but capitalism as an ideal makes sense, because at the end of the day, money tends to flow to the best tool given enough time and visibility, right? Mm-hmm. So you need enough time to make the ramp. You need enough visibility. I call that marketing. You can call it whatever you want. But then whoever does the best job typically makes the most money. That's as meritocratic as we've ever gotten. Mm-hmm. Anything beyond that, then you start regulating, because, like the test to vote is still government regulation, even though you're trying to like use it to opt out of government regulation. So yeah, I don't know what the solutions are except for less solutions. Like, stop trying to solve all these problems and just let the chips fall.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
I think that's exactly what needs to happen. And the question is how to get there. I think having these conversations actually do matter and do make a difference. Like, it's definitely brought me to, like, me watching and listening to things online has definitely brought me to learn a lot more. And that said, I'm someone who's interested in this stuff, right?
Yeah.
The great thing about Trump is that a lot more people have gotten interested in politics, even if they don't necessarily.
Oh, this affects me.
Huh?
People are saying, "Oh, this impacts me. This actually could change my." Yeah.
Yeah. Did you see the thing I posted on Instagram with the feed the resistors or something like that? It's a thing.
No.
It's a coffee shop that I found in Dumbo, and it was like pure anti-Trump. So I found this picture. This is from a book about it's a cookbook. So it's literally about how, cooking. And then like part 1 was like meals for when you're in a hurry because like you're so busy doing the resistance, and meals for when you're out and about and demonstrating and you need a snack, or like that was like 3 parts like that. And it starts like this: 7 days into Donald J. Trump's presidency, 6 days after so many of us marched across the world, I sat in a church recreation room with my wife, Grace, near our home in the Hudson Valley at an immigrants' rights meeting. We were listening to a local organizer explain in 2 languages how to know and protect your rights and how to be an active ally. As we listened, news alerts went off on phones, ding ding all over the room, giving us all updates on the first version of the travel ban the president wished to enforce. It felt as if no matter how quickly we rallied to find a solution, the problem itself wouldn't even stand still. Change, it's been said, is the only constant. In that moment, we were reminded so clearly that resistance must always be the change's companion. Wait, what? Complacency was no longer a privilege any of us could continue to afford. It's just the beginning of this one. 7 days into Donald Trump's presidency, 6 days after so many of them marched across the world. That's like the women's march, right? So yeah, I marched as a woman. I sat in a church recreation room with my wife. So this is a woman writing and her wife. So she's a lesbian. Near our home in Hudson Valley is like, Woodstock and all that. And then immigrants' rights meetings. So we're definitely for immigrants' rights. And then a local organizer explaining in 2 languages. I just loved how many little
like
factoids
narcissism
she could put into that sentence, saying, I'm lesbian, I march with the women, immigrants' rights, and blah blah. Virtue signaling, I think they call it.
I like your little note here. It deserves a prize.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no difference between her and the totalitarian leader that comes out with all of his military medals that he's awarded himself. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, all right, you're obviously very important. I'm glad that you were able to explain it to us. Yeah. Not to get back on my favorite topic, but I like what Jordan Peterson says about all that. He's like, stop stop the protesting, go fix yourself. Like if everybody focused on fixing themselves, and then, you know, he talks about bearing up under the heaviest weight you can imagine, under the heaviest weight you can handle. Like how amazing would the world be if every single human being went and took as much responsibility as they were physically, mentally, and emotionally capable of handling. Like instantly, so many of our problems would go away. Or if 1% of the population did that, or 5 or 10 or whatever.
Right.
Yeah. Other than this, like, well, you know, and there's protesting has its place, but in so many instances, it's like, what are you going to accomplish? You know, you're just making yourself feel important.
Exactly. Well, and so. There's a construction company down the street here that I walk past every once in a while. It's like G Builder or something like that, and they're like, their slogan is something like "We built a reputation, we don't rest on it," or something like that. Which I'm like, okay, that's a little convoluted for a tagline, but hey, nice try. If I were making a construction company, my tagline would be, "We get it right the first time, or it's free."
Yeah.
And then I would pay all my employees based on that. I'd say, you get this right the first time. I don't care if it costs more. You get it right the first time. And if you don't, and we have to go back and do it over, I'm going to deduct the pay I paid you the first time, and I'm not going to pay you to fix it, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what we want. We want people to get it right the first time. And in constructing this building, so now they've just shut down my favorite feature, which is the steam room, because it's leaking into the apartment downstairs, and someone just moved out. It moved into the apartment underneath it.
Oh, no.
I'm like, how incompetent do you have to be to construct a building and a steam room and like not make sure? Like, it's your job for fucking, you know, this is your job. This is your only job is to make sure that this shit works.
Yeah.
It's 2018.
There's a book on hiring I read. It wasn't very good, so I'm not even going to pimp out the author's name. But one really good thing he said is we find people with the highest level of incompetence. And so like we promote people, you do a job, you do really well.
The Peter principle?
I don't know what that is.
The Peter principle is that you get promoted to exactly the point of incompetence.
Where you can okay, so what's that called? The Peter principle?
The Peter principle, yeah. I think it's Drucker actually who came up with that.
Oh,
like,
well,
yeah.
That wasn't the book I was reading. It was some hiring guru. And he talked about that with vendors too. He goes, you go out, you submit an RFP, and then you pick the guy who has the absolute lowest bid and just enough like mediocre reviews or
that's not quite the Peter
whatever.
Okay, yeah.
Well, he used one and then segued into the other. But that's what happens with these contractors. That's why everybody hates contractors. Because if you paid 20% more, you're going to get a rock star guy. My handyman is $50 an hour, 50. And people hear that and their eyes get this big. They're like, "Oh my God, you know, that's absurd. You're getting taken advantage of." But he can do in 90 minutes what takes other guys 3 days to do. So I'll pay him $50 an hour all day long.
Right. Even if you have nothing for him to do.
Yeah, just because. Why would I do that? Yeah, passive universal income. He deserves it, Calvin. He's human.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny. So how do we fix things? Like we talked about a lot of the problems. What do you think if we were to all make one change? What's the one change that's ubiquitous that could send us off, at least like slightly correct the path, the collision course?
I think that the key missing piece is thinking. I think that's the one thing that most people don't do. They just don't do thinking. It's hard. It's painful to think. It's like your head hurts when you have to think.
Well, it's scary
about things, right? And so we just regurgitate things without really thinking them through, and I think that's a big problem. We don't teach kids to think.
You know what's funny about that is you asked me earlier today how they were keeping silver artificially low, and I offered a platitude soundbite that I'd heard on a podcast, but the truth is I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I mentally reprimanded myself for even saying those words because I just heard somebody else that I respect say it, but I never dug into it. You know, like I think, and we do so much of that where it's like, oh, here's a fact that I'll accept because it aligns with my worldview.
Right, true.
Instead of, I need to go figure out that, because that's a pretty bold statement to say out loud to a friend and for somebody that you respect without having some level of validation that I didn't have. Right. And it just makes me wonder, like, do I do that 1 billion times a day? You know, like without even realizing.
I think you're pretty honest about it. You're like, I'm not really sure to be like.
Well, I started to bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't. I just started to like what you just said. I just started to regurgitate is all. So I wasn't lying. I was just giving you information that I had by proxy instead of information that I had firm footing on.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. we have to rely on other people's information. Like Thomas Sowell has done all his research for his books, and I have to
Yeah.
trust that he did that and he did that diligently. And like someone else can go in and check it if they want, even though for a lot of things, nobody really does that. Like the whole idea in science that other people, your peers, can review your findings and stuff. It doesn't happen very often in practice, but it's
You want
possible.
crazy? So I do it. One of my talks that I do is called the Echo Chamber, um, and it's about how content is ruining the world. I know we probably got a jet, so I'll be super super quick. Here we go. So here's a talk. Can I share my screen, or do I need to send this to you?
I think you can show the screen.
Okay, that's what I'm going to try to do. Shit, I can't even find it. This gal did a dissertation. I think she's at the University of Illinois or something. And she said that 90% of academic papers go uncited. Now, this is an academic paper. It was published in a here we go. It was published in a really reputable journal, and she says that 90% of academic papers go uncited. Here's what's insane: she didn't cite the source of the study that showed that 90% of academic papers go uncited. When you dig in, it ends up being closer to 68%. But here's a reputable accredited university with an academic paper being published in a reputable accredited scientific journal, with the primary thesis being that 90% of academic papers go uncited, and she didn't cite her fucking study. Like, that to me just encapsulates everything that's wrong with the world, because we just take information and we're like, oh, this is true. And like you said, nobody digs into it, nobody thinks about it, nobody whatever.
Right. Something I've been fascinated with recently is Greg Braden. Do you know who he is?
No.
He's one of these like little like spiritual new agey guys, but he's actually a geologist and a scientist. So he did a series that you can watch on Gaia TV called Missing Links, where he kind of dives into history of the world and humanity and how we understand ourselves and our world and stuff. And it's really fascinating stuff. And one of the things, like, just to like boil it down, he's like, our basic assumptions about humans and about the world are turning out to be false. There are civilizations that are way older than what we thought, that seem to have had way more advanced technology than we believed. There's, I forget all the details, but basically, like, our fundamental worldview is false on so many accounts, and this is not just like, yet another Deepak Chopra standing out, slinging, meaningless sentences out there, as he's wont to do. It's actually diving into the details, and it's just, you have these facts, these anomalies, these things that happen, like the black swan thing, right? Where like you have things that actually directly contradict our theories, and yet science is very slow at adopting. Like this other book I was reading by Rupert Sheldrake about, it's called Science Set Free, about the same kind of thing. Like the underlying worldview of science is like materialism, that we're just like these mechanic physical beings. There's no kind of spiritual or consciousness dimension or some higher, or like, the way like medicine, which is something that I'm very interested in. The way to heal and fix is like, pills and biochemistry and chemo or surgery or things like that. And yet the fact is, like, we don't do comparative studies of like, all right, let's take a group of people and say this group will treat with like watching comedies and laughing a lot, and this group will treat with acupuncture, and this group will treat with and etc. and like traditional medicine, and see how they actually compare. Nobody's, according to Rupert Sheldrake anyway, nobody's doing those studies because
there's no money in comedy and acupuncture. There's money in.
We might find that these other methods actually really work, and it breaks with our understanding of humans and healing and our world, essentially, right? Prayer, does prayer work? Intention, does that work? There's lots of evidence that suggests that it does, actually. Why, right?
Right.
To me, that's, I'm like, if we don't figure that out, like like if we're not investing into, researching that, what the hell are we doing? Like,
Yeah.
we're clearly not concerned with the well-being of human beings. Yeah.
Yeah. One of my best friends has a T-shirt that says, "The hard work of one person does more than the prayer of millions," which is pretty, it's kind of thumbing your nose at everything. But what I think is interesting about it is, anytime anybody's in like a really call it a foxhole situation, I don't care how atheist you are, you instantly are like, okay, this is my very last resort, and I'm going to try to, on some level, reach out to something bigger and better than me. Kid gets sick, you're in a car accident, whatever. Like every human being's first inclination is to go immediately to prayer. And I don't think that validates or invalidates prayer, but it definitely says something about how important it is to us. I just feel like you're just born with it.
Right. But there has been studies made where there's like Lynn McTaggart, who does these experiments called the intention experiment, where she'll get like a bunch of people to, hold consciously an intention of healing for some person or some other thing or outcome or whatever. Mm-hmm. And as far as I know, there is actual evidence that this has an effect. And like all I'm saying is these are things that we need to look into and take seriously, because placebo effect alone, right? We're proving that people get better if they think that you're doing something for them. Like, let's figure out how to use that. Yeah. I forget how I got onto that topic.
You said think. That's where we started. You said we fix the world by thinking, and then I had a follow-up question to that I didn't want to interrupt you with. But my question is how do we make people think? Like, how do you not force that, but how do you make people who aren't doing it interested in it?
What I was getting at was the whole climate science thing, right? That or climate change, where Greg Braden's is saying they're like, yes, the climate is changing, but it's not for the reasons that we think. Like, it's always been changing in these cycles, and we're due for another cycle. The danger is not the heating. The danger is that usually what happens after is cooling, is an ice age, and what are we going to do about that? And so if we spend all our resources trying to slay the wrong dragon, then we're going to be in a shitty situation. Huh?
I said cool the earth down right before the ice age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, CO2 is an issue. Like, there's way more CO2 than there's ever been, but we don't understand it. And again, we want to be smart about it. Just again, so like the whole think Bjorn Lomborg, who's was in the Danish, hired by the Danish. He ran a Ministry of Environment or something in Denmark 10 years ago, 15 years ago, something like that. And he's doing these. He wrote a book called The Skeptical Environmentalist. And he does these comparative studies. Like, he looks at the same data that other people have compiled and used, and he just looks at it with a more critical eye. And he finds that, like, for example, the Paris Agreement is awful. It's a horrible agreement.
Really?
Yes. It costs a shit ton of money. It really, dramatically puts dramatic dampers on growth and industry and everything else. And at a very high cost, and with almost no effect on temperature. And the way that the official numbers show a meaningful effect is that they assume that everybody adheres to the letter, to the T, on everything up until 2030 when it ends, and then keeps doing the same for another 70 years, and then it would have a slight impact. But that's not what the agreement actually says. The agreement is through 2030. And not everybody's going to keep their words anyway. And so the actual effect of this is like almost non-existent. But the costs are very, very real.
Yeah. I had no idea. Yeah. I have a tough time with climate change. There's so much data out there. It's all very contradictory. And it's all really compelling.
My problem with it is a religion about it. Like, you can't bring up, like, let's talk about the actual facts and like, let's be smart about this. Like, sure. What Bjorn Lomborg did was say, well, yeah, all right, so the climate is changing. What are we going to do about it? We can spend, we can reduce CO2, and it's going to have, like in the ways that we're looking to do, and it's going to have these costs. It's going to cost trillions and trillions of dollars. What else could we do with that money? We could, fight malaria, AIDS. We could build, dams. We can move people whose islands are going to get flooded and bring them somewhere else and help them get a life there. Like, we can spend that money in so many different ways. Let's at least talk about it. And people were just outraged that you would even say that, because obviously climate. The other question is, like, what's the optimal temperature of Earth? Like, for the past 100,000 years, it's been fluctuating up and down. How do we know that this exact temperature is the perfect one?
Right.
maybe it's going to be much better when it's a little warmer or a little colder. Like, how do you know?
We have a really bad cosmic view of history. We've been here. There's an analogy to this, though, but like if humanity was on the tip of your arm, it would be like a millimeter of your nail or something. Yeah, something absurd. So, part of me wonders, like, and this isn't a nihilistic statement, but, maybe on some levels, the cycle includes us. Animals go to sleep all the time.
Sure. I think it definitely does, but it's also, if we have the power to survive through this, why wouldn't we? We're going to do that. Right?
Sure. But that's where it gets really interesting, because, we've been talking about, like, policy and how trying to correct any natural trend always makes it worse. Mm-hmm. My big fear here is, outside of people trying to do things that are practical, like recycling and sustainable living and whatever. But, they've been talking about shooting, I don't remember what, but shooting something into the sky in order to block out the sun and keep. I
think that's nonsense. Yeah.
Cool. Have you heard about that, though? Do you know what I'm talking about? They're going to shoot some, like, it was like some chemical. It's the same stuff they put in aerosol cans. And in my mind, I'm like, man, that's just. I'd actually rather just let it heat up than whatever it is you morons think you're going to do to fix it.
I think probably we're going to find that the CO2 is problematic. So that if you look at the data, right, the historical data, temperature has always risen first, and then CO2, which is one of those things where you're like, wait, what? If CO2 causes temperature to rise, like, why wouldn't it be the other way around? Like, the actual order of things is that the temperature rises and then CO2 rises.
Why is that? Do they know?
Well, then there's various explanations of, like, well, yeah, but then, like, something makes the temperature rise first, and then the CO2 starts to rise because of that, and then it kind of reinforces the rising temperatures. That's the explanation that I've seen from the traditional mainstream climate scientists. But I haven't seen a good explanation of what it is that caused the first temperature rise. What Greg says is it's all about, like, how the Earth tilts on its axis. There's like three. There's the one that we know with the seasons, and then there's like another two. And that's what causes it. And it's like the fact that the Earth is warming now is right on cue. It's right on time according to that. And if it wasn't rising, that would be cause for concern. But then, so temperature rising is what traditionally has caused CO2 levels to rise. And what that does then, I think is the theory there, is that actually is what causes the temperature to drop. And so what we might see with all this CO2 is a much more severe ice age possibly. But again, I don't know. I'm not the climate scientist here. All I know is, like, I smell religion when I see it. Right? There's too much dogmatism in this conversation, and to me, like, the fact that there's good reason to think that the Paris Agreement is a stupid idea, and every single country in the world, except for America and I think Syria or something, has signed it now, right? That tells you just how widespread that madness is. Lack of actual free thinking, clear thinking, critical thinking. So to me, the solution is innovation, as always. Like, what you suggest there sounds a little interventionist on behalf of the planet. Like, I think I heard something about, like, bacteria that gobbles up CO2 or things like that.
Yeah, let's talk about that. There's a few things, right? Like, there's an algae in the ocean that eats plastic, and then there's bacteria that they shoot into the sky that eat CO2. But even that ends up being, even if it's natural, it's still intervention.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, like, finding ways to get the CO2 out versus, like, shielding from sunlight, I don't think that's a good idea, but I mean, we're messing with the environment anyway, right? And that's what we do. We're gonna mess with it. But
Well, we're not
for
that.
me,
I mean,
it's
like,
about like having a respect that for like knowing what we don't know, though, knowing that there's so much about how this world works, including human life and healing and the bigger world that we don't understand, and having respect for that, right? That's
yeah.
what I see lacking.
Yeah, and you made a point about dogmatism that I agree with, and I think that the zealots pretend like this is like an inherent flaw in human nature, like we're pests and we go and we destroy everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Industrial Revolution or industrialization started in like the late 1800s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when we've really been at this for 150 years, and we've known it's a problem for maybe half of that time on a micro scale, and then. It's a problem that
Well,
really
back in the
emerged
70s, they were talking
20
about
years.
global cooling, right? That was a big concern there, and running out
Yeah,
of resources too.
but so my point being though that we actually, in the grand scheme of things, we're pretty quick to respond. Like we're pretty proactive as a
Oh
species.
fuck yeah! When we're really threatened and we really start to feel the pain, we're gonna come
Yeah,
up with a solution,
yeah. So I'm not
unless
as
we get in
worried as
our own way.
everybody else. Yeah, exactly. I do think that there's going to be some growing pains. That's why I've got a couple days worth of food and water on hand.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think it's apocalyptic. And if it is, there's nothing I can do about it. So now we're in the.
There's this guy who wrote a book called The Moral Case for Fossil Fuel. I haven't read the whole thing, but he's like, dude, they were saying all this doomsday stuff about burning fossil fuels. It was gonna like smog and climate change and all these things. And like, if you look at it, health situation, all that stuff. If you look at it, we've burned so much more. We're gonna run out of it too. We've burned so much more of this stuff, and pretty much every parameter, air quality and everything else, is better than it was before, and nowhere near what they said it was going to be. Like they were basically saying that London would cease to exist by the year 2000 or things like that. It's pretty much still there. People are stabbing each other with knives, but the city's definitely still there.
Yeah.
And I think one of his points is like what the environmentalists really are is they're anti-human, right?
Yeah, I've heard that case a lot.
Huh?
I've heard that case a lot.
Yeah.
Everything is above humanity in their minds and their eyes.
Everything, like, humans just shouldn't exist. We should just like stop. We're like having an impact on the world, and we should just stop doing that because like whatever has an impact on the world, stop doing it.
It's weird the mantles they choose too. Like certain things that I don't feel like are as threatening get picked up, and then other things that I think could have far more of positive impact. Like cricket meat apparently could feed the whole world on a hundredth of the size or whatever, but that doesn't appeal to us because nobody wants to eat a cricket, so nobody's talking about that. Like there are solutions to problems that we're just going to ignore because it's like, yeah, I'm not going to eat a bug.
It's funny. I was listening to Ben Shapiro talk about like how to debate liberals and and one of the things he talked about was like gun control, like when liberals want to ban assault weapons, which is not a well-defined category, but then you're like, well, what about handguns? Handguns kill way more people than assault rifles every year. It's like, do you want to ban them too?
Yeah, and then
and then the answer is yes, but they're not going to say that because that would really get.
Oh, they will. I've seen interviews. Actually, I think it was one with Shapiro, and he talked about defining an assault weapon, and then he goes, "So should we ban knives?" And the guy he's talking to goes, "Yes." And it's like
done in London now.
Yeah, which I mean, at that point, I think the conversation breaks down because now you just have an entirely different value set with that person. There can't be any more communication when you have such a disparity in values.
No, I think you totally can't have a conversation. You just need to talk about like why, right? And I mean the big thing too, like with the shootings and stuff, like how many women do these kill people in school shootings? How many girls? I don't think it's ever happened, right? So these women grow up in the same environments they have the same access to guns. So it's clearly not about the guns. There's something about these boys and their psychology and what's going on that's causing them to do it. It's not.
Well, and they're all on pharmaceuticals. Nobody talks about the drugs.
Right.
Every single one of these fools, I think, with it's got to be 95% of these guys are on some antidepressant that
God. I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Calvin, it's unbelievable, the percentages. And again, nobody talks about it because the pharmaceutical companies are in bed with the
Oh my God. But I mean that whole like the the Prozacs and the what are they called?
Yeah, the antidepressant. I mean, not that there's
Yeah.
anything wrong with that. I think some people. I've got a good friend that like relies on it heavily, and it's really, really, really helped her.
It's
But that doesn't mean we don't talk about the fact that bell tower shooters are almost ubiquitously on a drug.
it's I mean these things. I have a friend who's on it. She's been on it for years, and she is has been weaning and now finally gotten off of it, and it's horrible. It's a horrible drug. It's like back to the AI and stuff. We human beings have emotions, and when I started this conversation, I was like, I'm in this like crisis of meaning, right?
Yeah.
These emotions are important. They're
Right.
information that we need, and when you numb them out with the pills, there's no way that you're not going to be worse off from that.
Yeah, there's signals.
Exactly.
The signals.
We need it. That's how we function as human beings. We're not computers. We're not robots. We're not machines.
Yeah.
We're not going to be that. Stop
Yeah.
trying to pretend like it. Yeah.
Well, stop trying to not be. If people are like, oh, I'm just so sad, I'm so depressed. It's like, well, why?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I went through my divorce. I went through my divorce in 2011, and I was in San Francisco because that was part of the whole, like, we lived in America together. We were planning on moving back to America together, and then she didn't or whatever. So so I was in San Francisco, away from my ex-wife, away from my kids, and there was like at least 3 months where it just felt like my chest had been ripped open. And I was feeling everything so deeply, and it was so raw. And there was sadness. I'd be walking down the street and just burst into crying in the middle of, like, for no apparent reason, and just like sobbing and sobbing. And while it was going on, it was painful and it was beautiful. It was like one of the most life-affirming, amazing experiences of my life. And then it went on for probably like 3 months, 4 months, maybe even. And then like one day it was just kind of like gone, and it was more back to normal. And like looking back at it, I think I did a pretty good job of enjoying it. But even there still is like nagging fear. Like, is this ever gonna go away? Is it ever gonna be like, am I ever gonna be okay again or something? If I could go back and tell myself something there, I would say, just savor it. Really savor this pain, this sadness, this feeling of tremendous loss, of like having lost that family that I'd created with my wife and my children, and like such a you've just recently created yours, right? That's such a powerful, amazing, beautiful, loving thing, and to have lost that, it was very painful. And if I could go back and do it over, I would have savored it even more, and just like tasted those drops of tears in my mouth and just really enjoyed the taste of it, because that's what it is. It is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah, this is cliche, but I think it speaks to how good life is, that the absence of something could cause you that much pain. That just means the presence of it was that much more validated. And it's not that it's going away. It's just a transition in the way it's experienced. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with me, man. That's powerful. That's interesting.
Yeah.
You got to put that down on paper, Calvin. I think that's an important experience to share with people. I think a lot of people could benefit from that.
Yeah.
Are you going to write a book?
Yes.
Yeah, you need to. Where are you with that? What's the timeline?
I don't know, man. I've tried. I've started many times, over and over again. Gotten like hundreds of pages in, and then like, I don't know what is going on. What's going on?
So can I tell you? This isn't the trick. This was my trick, because I had a similar experience. And then I heard from somebody that was on stage at a conference I was at, and he goes, "I woke up every day an hour earlier than I usually do." He goes, "I wrote 1,000 words a day." And there's 2 rules. The first rule is you're not allowed to delete anything. The second rule is you have to keep moving forward, so you can't go back and edit. And you just write 1,000 words a day, and you might find out that you've like kind of gone off on a rabbit hole or a tangent that you don't want to pursue. Just leave it alone. Come back to center. But no matter what, write. And if you can't think of anything to write, then you have to write, "I can't think of anything to write," 1,000 times. Right. But then at the end of 3 months or 6 months or whatever, you have this manuscript, and then what you do, and the analogy he uses, he goes, it's like marble. Then you chisel away, and you find out that you actually have everything that you want and you need. There's a bunch of bullshit there that you need to cut out. But then you chisel it away, and so then the next 30, 60, 90, 180 days, whatever, is editing. And that's actually the more painful part. But the problem with especially really brilliant people is you see in 3 dimensions. It's probably the way you code. And so when you see in 3 dimensions, in the creation process, you're constantly trying to make sure that it lines up with the X and the Y and the Z axis, and it's never going to do that. Mm-hmm. So you just need to like write, get it all out, and then code, and then actually build something. So I don't know if that helps or not, but try it. Tell me what you think.
I've heard similar. Yeah, I'll get back. I'll get back in the game at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually talked to Gay Hendricks, was a mentor of mine for a while, and he's written 25 books.
Sent me one of his books, didn't you?
I did, yes, I did. Yeah. The Big Leap, yeah.
Yeah.
And sent some stuff to it, and he was like, most people, when they feel the urge to write, should just lie down, eat an ice cream, and wait for the feeling to pass. But you, my friend Calvin, you're a good writer.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I started, when was it first? I don't know. I wrote like a small ebook like 10, 11 years ago. And I've done, but yeah, fuck me, man. It's the editing that kills me. Like once I get to that point, it's like.
No, I hired somebody to do that.
Yeah. All right, man. I gotta run. Actually, I have a meeting with my team in 7. So.
I have nothing more to do. I did that.
Yeah, you did that. I just learned that this is like the elevator button when you want to.
I don't understand what we're doing.
Point.
Oh yeah, that's the Clinton thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not that much up though. It's just like the tip of the thumb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this is the Trump.
That's affirming. Yeah.
That's the Trump thing.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks for having me again, dude. This was fun.
Yes, I loved it. Great to see you again, my friend.
Cool, brother.
Talk to you
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Thanks, Kevin.